record now.
Okay.
So we're recording. Hello.
How you doing?
Good. So you had mentioned that your name is Heaven's Wolves. No, it's actually Kyle Edwards.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah,
So nice to meet you.
It's called Heaven's Wolves.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. So, and we were chatting a bit about our days. You had a pretty good day outside. So why don't you just tell me a bit about yourself, and we'll get a bit familiar that way, and then we can jump into it.
Yeah. Well, I'm in between contract work and starting a new business, which I want to keep, under wraps for now.
Okay.
Small business. But I was a military, started out and was sniper and got out of the military after some tours, went over to some contract work, worked with the foreign military for a couple of years as well, and just kind of got fed up with all of the travel and wanted to, I'm getting damn near close to 40, getting close up there.
Yeah.
And no kids, not married. So I'm just like, hey, I need to find something else, go back for the, closer to home and
Right.
find,
So you're a sniper.
I was, yes.
You have all of that training that all of us mere mortals admire so much.
Well, I would rather explain it that kind of more of a thank God for, all the great emulators out there and great men and women and mothers and fathers and doctors and teachers that we all looked up to, that we even have a volunteer force. And Canada's got the same kind of thing where I've met a lot of snipers from Canada and great guys, and they're kind of the same. It's just the same exact thing. And so it's because of other people that we even want to go and do that. So it's more of a tip of the hat more to the strong citizenry that we have than you guys looking it up. And it's that's what's the other way around.
Yeah, because you had mentioned that when we were chatting back and forth, and I'd never heard that before, and it never dawned on me that if you don't have a quality commons, what are you fighting for?
Exactly. I was a very fortunate upper middle class and third youngest boy that I just kind of right place, right time when the war kicked off, that it was kind of like I felt I can, and I'm physically able, so it's the right time. I don't have kids and stuff, and I don't have, going for my master's degree. I don't even have a college degree. But I did get a very diverse experience in a lot of different stuff, because in the military, what kind of got me into this was I worked for a surveillance outfit, long range surveillance. And we were kind of like one of those elements that is like the National Geographic of the Army or military. Marines have similar assets, and Canada and Brits and everyone does. But it was where like Intel says, hey, we don't know what's going on in this village. It's close by the border. Go way out there and small team, and let's watch it for a few days, 6 days, and do patterns of life studies. And I just kind of realized, like, holy shit, in the middle of it, it's so much time that you're doing this and watching the same little village and taking every little detail and pictures and video and just amazing amounts of information, that I just kind of realized, like, this is field science of National Geographic way, but in just another subset of it. And
so you're studying humans like a scientist would wildebeest or something.
Exactly, because we couldn't let them know we were there, just like the National Geographic video camera guy can't let them know. They need to catch it in its natural environment, and it's the same thing what we did. But then you could do like doping studies where he's like, let's watch it for a few days and let's dope it by having a U.S. patrol come in or something, and might come in on another side of the village. We can be on one side and watch, they're hiding behind this wall looking at that, but we're over here in the mountains videoing it. And, we had access to calling in signal intelligence on like a guy with a cell phone, they'd ping it where he's at, ping where he's calling to, and run into it that way. You know, I don't want not to get too into it, but
so that's interesting. So you'd actually spark an event so that you could see a change in behavior.
Yeah, dope situation, and it's kind of, you know, see the before and the after effects,
Right.
and then you do that in different areas, and you start to understand this social organism is, and that kind of took me down to the roads of, you know, how would Darwin do this? So I started looking at that, and you know, you learn a lot more about this stuff when you get out, because in the thick of it, you're so involved in it that you know, you're focused. And then in the years after, and I was a captain in the Jordanian Royal Guard for a couple of years, and that's the country I was talking about, and observing them, and I love them best. I love them so much, and they have their faults, they have their problems, just like us. And I'm pretty hard on the Islamic and Arabic culture because, well, I have a certain investment into it and love for them that I want to, you know. And in the military, we're really hard on the guys that we love, that we want them to do best and not weak out and tap out. It's like, it's trying to strengthen them up through hard, tough love. And anyways, after observing them as well and getting deeper into it and living among them and great connections and friendships, I just started noticing more and more of this relationship to us and nature. And you know, there's got to be a way to simplify these spectrums, these life strategies and R/K selection compared to military strategies and economic strategies and political strategies and the whole thing, kind of like what Kurt Doolittle's talking about with propertarianism and the completing the scientific method, and you know, getting all the language down into one you know, like, so it's all common language. Well, the math is kind of that too, and this is kind of, I see what he's doing, and he's like, I want to try and plug into that, because he's done all the hard work, he's done all the legwork for years on where all these intricacies of all the different human thought and everything and all sciences, and this is kind of like a macro spectrum that I think plugs into everything that he's talking about. And I hope that it can line up with what he's doing and maybe help. But like I say, I'm not a physicist. I'm not you know, I'm just from a very, very unique, weird background that kind of got me on to a independent studies that, you know, is like you know, post-traumatic stress can sometimes turn into post-traumatic growth. And I had this after seeing all of that, I just had this thirst for knowledge, and because it can be debilitating at times too, because I'm sure you all know about that, because hell, I have to pull in the dictionary just to keep up with you guys and all your big words. But
well, there's times that something will fall into place, and then like I can't get it out of my head for a day and a half until I get it all sorted out. You know, it's all quite often, especially when I'm first learning propertarianism, it was like a routine that was running in the back of my head all the time. And then something would pop, and then I couldn't keep up with it because all these connections fall into place. So when you first posted about the heat island effect and long, it was long, low energy wavelengths versus high frequency, short wavelengths. And I was going, okay, he's drawing analogies here. Let's see where it goes. But then you started getting into the heat island effect, and then the amygdala. And I'm like, okay, now this is more than an analogy. Now he's finding operational connections. So that was like, okay, this is interesting. I want to see what happens. And then almost immediately, like you posted the thing about the amygdala the other day, which carries over to all of the stuff that we've been having conversations in the group around endocrinology and behavior and in the whole work. So can you give us an overview and then maybe just dive into the details, and I'll just interject if I have questions and go from there.
I guess the overview would have to start I'd have to say it starts with Isaac Newton as far as I'm concerned. And he was, you know, obviously he's a brilliant mathematician, finding the colors in light. And he was very big on simplicity, and he talking about truth will ever be told in the simplicity of things, not in the duplicity and multiplicity of things. And says that Mother Nature's nature's a fan of simplicity. And then going from him and figuring out the light and all that, you go into the Enlightenment era and everything. And what do they, you know, in the Old English, it means enlighten, and then you go back from there, it goes in the light. And, you know, so to me, it was kind of like enlightenment in the light, the most simplistic thing, no one can argue, and there's got to be the rest of energy and everything has to have some relativity with this. So you look real quick at the wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum, and with colors, I don't have the colors on here, my printer's color just hit the bed, but higher frequency, shorter wavelength, which would be high short on the XY grid here. And as you go through even the light spectrum, so you go, the highest frequency would be violet, indigo, you know, and then up towards red would be your your low frequency, long wavelength. Wavelengths time, so lifespan. And whenever you take that into the R/K selection theory, and you get the same patterns of high short frequency, short wavelength, and for R, and K being the other low long strategy. Well, so what's important about this wave stuff is whenever you look into quantum mechanics, and I'm not a big physicist, but I try and look at the simplicity, you know, what's the meat and potatoes of what these brilliant men are trying to say, and how can I relate it to my life or economics or whatever. And you see Charles de Broglie, or de Broglie, it's spelled almost de Broglie, but not pronounced that way. I think it was like 1929, he did the particle wave duality. It was his hypothesis, and then later on was proven by other guys, I believe. And so he was saying that particles, because you do light through multiple slits and then other slits not in line with those, the light was still getting through them, proving that the energy in light was moving in not just a particle. It didn't have just particle properties, but also wave properties. And so I was thinking, like, well, I can see the wave properties in these population fluctuations in R/K selection, and you can see those wave properties in strategies. And so I was just kind of thought, you know, well, why not apply that particle, wave, or matter, and all life has functions in some wave propagation that you can patternize and almost put them on a spectrum. And this can be a civilization, it can be economics, it can be whatever. So whenever you do it on XY grid kind of graph, kind of hard to see. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So you got your wavelength, and the longer the wavelength, the shorter your frequency is going to be up on this. So if you have a low frequency, long wavelength, you hit on the point over here that's closer towards wolves, humans, and everything. And that would be, so to sum it up and make the relative strategy is, I just say low long versus high short. And as you come up, it goes towards, you know, more towards your microorganisms at the very top, super high R selective. And then you can put this into other things. So take the humans alone as a subset, and you can see, you know, the military being, or not military, I'm sorry, like just the warrior police and your good two-parent father that's a good hard worker is going to be on that more conservative, dare I say it, all the people out there, but more conservative side, K selective, into the nuclear family, two-parent systems, and as you go towards more liberalism, you also get, and that was the rural side, was the K, obviously, and you get into the urban side, you get more liberal. And if you see the 2016 demographic or elections on a map, you just see every big city is blue as hell, all the rural areas red as can be. And so I started to look into, does the, you got the famous the rat studies, the rat utopia, and showing the pressure dynamics of your carrying capacity and competition and everything. It just killed them off, and they had rode that very high reproduction and low lifespan as a culture, say.
Right. So that's the other one. I don't know if you've heard of it. Is short life history and long life history.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of maps over top of R and K. And we were looking at
out of life history, correct?
I think so, yeah. And then we were looking at biohistory for a while too, that has similar patterns, but I think he overreaches too much. So that idea under high predatory pressure, the survival strategy shifts to produce as many kids as you can quickly to make up for any losses, predatory losses, but also congregated around the group. So there's a lot of group loyalty and a lot of out-group adversity in that, versus carrying capacity where it's a continuous in-group competition for resources, and then you have less children, later in life, and there's a lot of correlation there as well. So when you're talking about point wave, could you describe the difference in the stuff that you're seeing as what would be the point and what would be the wave? You mentioned the strategy would be the wave, but what would be the point?
I'm sorry. I kind of having trouble hearing a little bit what you're saying there, but
sorry.
The strategy.
Yeah, like when you were talking about the wave particle relation, and you mentioned the strategy was like the wave. Group survival strategy is like the wave. What would be the particle?
Well, we are matter. We are bouncing around inside of this, but as we go through time on a spectrum like energy, we are just an energy thing. We propagate in a certain wave function, and it changes. So we're, different, just like you see in our selection, it can go up, almost like a heartbeat, and operate like that. But I just saw us as the particle. We are the matter, or any entity you look at is the matter. That's what you're looking at, is the noun, or that object or that entity. Well, it becomes, everything has certain wavelengths. Even the Earth rotating around the sun is one way. It can be patterned out into wave, and that's nothing new. And that's the thing about this, is it's so simple in a way that it can be easily just kind of, well, yeah, I knew that. I know the electromagnetic spectrum. But when you kind of really use it as macro language for a lot of systems and energy, and that's where the relativity, I think, can be used to not necessarily make some huge new statement, but really just to stomp out some of the really, really dumb ones out there that are getting a lot of credit and stuff. But that's where also I think the urban heat island really came in. And as I was talking about the rat utopia and stuff, so I started looking into population studies and comparing that on the electromagnetic spectrum, not just the population and reproduction rate, but also what comes along with higher frequency is higher energy, higher temperature, and with that is higher radiation levels. And if you look at the urban heat island effect, you have this huge population, all concrete. The winds are getting stopped and slowed. Just the amount of water that can pass through, the heat that comes off of the radiation, then you add in the pressure of just the proximity of us as particles in this radiation zone, this man-made, you know, that's kind of why these people are, all the crazy climate alarmists all live inside of these urban heat, man-made climate change zones.
Yeah, and then you know, the things like you said, like proximity to each other, but then the pace in the city is different, and then there's easier access to commons. So then the transactions, the velocity of transactions is higher. So it's like the pace is ramped up, you know.
Yeah.
In that with the most utopian experiments, because the pheromones of the beautiful ones would overpower the scent for the rest of the normal mice. That their pace would increase because they never knew where they needed to scent mark or not. There was constant confusion, and then all of that, you know, that maladaptive behavior came out, removed the beautiful ones, and they all went back to normal. So yeah, there's a lot of correlations across the whole thing here.
And then you look at the rest of the urban heat island effects, and what they're talking about is one of the big things is radiation. And if you look at, I think in Paris, they just did a study that their urban men in Paris, youth males, were down like 15% or 30% in either or both of sperm counts and testosterone levels. And what you find with, okay, so you take the male genitalia is outside of the body for a reason, because it's very susceptible to dying from heat temperature changes and high temperature. And so you go into a higher temperature area like that, and it makes kind of sense. And then, but there's also the social side to this that's putting pressure on them and causing them to wear things like skinny jeans, which holds their genitalia even closer to their body and even heats up more, which causes less testosterone and all that. All of these things also help depress the amygdala, which then we're talking about that threat confusion. And you see in the big urban cities in, where was it? I forget where it was, Baltimore. Then during the Black Lives Matter stuff, there were tons of people in the streets protesting and hating the police, who is the friend, and they're literally holding signs in hands with the Black Guerrilla family, Bloods, and the Crips. And it's the total threat confusion, and that's what the amygdala is, part of threat detection. And you can get this. It's almost like you do too many drugs, you do too much in the urban heat island. You can start to get a depressed amygdala that can cause these threat detection, where you're basically just you confuse between friend and foe. And we see this all the time with you guys were talking about the masculine and feminine, male and female thing of threat and detection as well. But in the urban cities, we have higher levels of men doing this threat confusion. And
yeah,
so
and it ends up being a feminization of men. Like higher baseline stress ends up reducing testosterone and reducing sperm counts, and then I imagine that also, just like it overtaxes the hypothalamus, it's probably overtaxing the amygdala. So the biological effects of overpopulation.
Yeah, and that's why we have this, they call it a left and a right. I think it's funny because they call it this left and right divide in America, when it's really a urban and rural divide. But it's kind of funny to me how people like to keep into this left-right paradigm, and I play into it too, just because it makes it easy for communication to everybody of what you're talking about. But to me, it's all about hierarchy, and it's more top down, like a trophic cascade from a wolf down and all of that. Whereas when you put it in that way, they see it from the grassroots up. But in the linear scale, you're seeing left, right, and they call that the divide. But there is no real divide on a line. It's the line divides this way, up and down, not linear. But they get that from I would assume it comes from just eons of us evolving and seeing the flat horizon of the earth and the ocean and thinking linearly, we're flat here, and we know it's not, and it's a circle, and it's not even that. It's not two-dimensional plane like the flat earthers. Sorry, buddies, but it goes into spherical. It's a 3D sphere, and that's what I'm trying to get into this, and that's how I can take that left-right line and they try and dichotomize and split the divide in between that, even though it's not. You connect a line into the two ends, and you've got a plane two-dimensional. Now, as you start to fold those in, and you get the lines on a tennis ball, if you can follow me on that.
Right. Yeah, I get you.
Look at that tennis ball from one angle, and you'll see the yin yang sign but that's two-dimensional, right? As you look at the line on the tennis ball that used to be what we, at a very, very small perspective, not a macro perspective of the earth, but being on one point of the earth and looking at that line, we saw left, right, flat horizon for our entirety. But if you look at a tennis ball now, if you take that line that's now became an equal angles at all points. I forget the definition of the line that makes up that. It becomes two spheres, or two pieces into one, and it's that whole dichotomy and duality that we're kind of talking about as well. Male, female, feminine, masculine, R/K. You still got you need it. Two is one. We need the liberal, we need the conservative, we need this bash. It's kind of like the corn crop growing, where we grow a little left, we go a little bit right, we fight back, and we keep going up the corn stalk and doing this. If we grow a left pedal every time, we just break over and die.
Yeah, like Luke has said before, that it's not so much about creating whole individuals as much as bringing individuals together into a whole. And then we do need the separate the separate temperaments, and you're right. Like, we're thinking two-dimensionally all the time, and I think it's a matter of adding in the next dimensions, which is, I think, exactly what Kurt's up to with testimonialism. It's about bringing in more dimensions of measure, so that you don't fall into these false dichotomies or even trichotomies anymore. Like I had the whole debate last week about I ran with a few guys, and all I was really trying to get at is that there's morally valueless analysis that can be done, that should be done prior to asserting your preference on top of it, and that means looking at all of the data from all of those perspectives, rather than just constantly just making value judgments, right, wrong. So it's like trying to take 3 or 4 dimensions and stuffing it into 2 dimensions. It's not going to work, right? So how did this apply to, you'd mentioned in one of the posts how it applied to military organization?
Well, I mean, show me a military, and I'll show you their society that built them. Show me a society, and I'll show you them anyone would show you them on RK kind of scales, and what their investment per in generally of that country, what their investment per child is, because we know, more kids, high birth rates, you're going to have less investment. Well, the military ends up doing a lot of things like that as well in those cultures, because the culture builds the military, because the military comes after the culture to defend that culture. Kind of what I was pointing at earlier or whatever. But so you'll see in the Arab militaries a lot of, and this is what I really wanted to help them try and break and get a new kind of, they didn't even have a subculture in their militaries, really. It was really, Islamic culture ran, and Bedouin culture and Arab culture, kind of all 3 of those put into one. What's his name? Norvell D. Atkin. He's written a lot. He wrote The Arab Mind. If you ever can read Why Arabs Lose Wars, it's a great one that kind of goes into why there's no NCOic core in their military, because the officers, because of cultural reasons, hold on to all the information and power in their platoons, and they don't really want to give it down to the other guys because that low trust in group, and because they want that dominance, they want to be that head domestic goat in the herd that's banging all, you know what I mean, and getting all the bounty, you know, and keeping his power, and it kind of stems from that. And gosh, shit, I kind of forgot where we were going with the.
No, that's a whole other point, because what it's starting to sound like now is, have you heard of PDI, or Power Distance Index?
Oh yes, and that goes right in with Price's law, which I was going into. That got me that curve, and I just turned his around with performance being lifespan and time versus reproduction rate being the number of your population. You know, it's kind of like the military. I did a little post on. I think I got a thing on it. Yeah, like this. So talking about the population density of different groups in nature. So a wolf pack, 10, 9. Talking about the square root of that group equals your super performers, or 50% of your performance. And in a wolf pack of 9, square root being 3, you have 3 to 6 ratio of super performers to non-super performers. And when you increase a group up to 100 and keep that, like, oh, I'm going to be the, you know, that very centralized leader where I'm controlling all 100. I don't want 10 groups of 10 squads that each have their own leader and their own competition level area group that they're competing against only. I'd rather have 100 people under my command, and only they all go to what I say. And then you drop your super performer performance down to the square root of 100, which is 10 to 90. So
So if you have smaller units, then your high performers,
yeah,
across the aggregate, you're going to have more high performers. So lower power distance.
What you want to go for just about all human organization systems. I know there's some studies in class sizes that might be different for this because of the developmental ages. But when you get into the war side, a lot of different business sides, you know, you want many managers instead of, you know, and many teams with their own leadership, causing their own problem solving, their own competition. And it's kind of like the 50 states, like, hey, let's spread it out to the 50 states so that, hey, California can go do some dumb shit to prove to the rest of us what not to do. And that's what I learned in the military. Huge, huge lesson. There's 2 ways of leading, and or you know, 2 types of leaders to learn from. It's the leader that you don't want to be, and there's the leader you want to be.
Right.
And those come down to one will be disciplined by fear, you know, and control you by fear of what discipline they can bring onto you, and how they can ruin your life. And that kind of fear, I'll fuck you up type of thing in the military. Just, you know, everyone's scared that they'll fuck up and you've got to go do a whole bunch of push-ups or something, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's not the leader to be. And that's kind of what you'll see in a lot of the liberal side of things, is just fear mongering and fear. And we'll do, you know, and, but the leader to be like, the one to learn from, is that the one who the younger bucks look up to, and they're afraid to fail him. And
so that means that there needs to be proximity to that leader, which goes back to what you're saying about emulation. So if you got 100 guys following one guy, there's no proximity to that guy, you have very low resolution emulation. Yeah. So,
and it's easy to be the gray man in the 100-man group, to be like, oh, fuck it, hey, Joe over there is doing all this work, man, I'm gonna go smoke cigarettes, fuck this, you know.
Right.
And then
so
it goes into empires, you know, you get that empire that's just so centralized, like it's an ant colony. You know, you end up with this single organism, like you see in the cities of the what do they call them, the NPCs that are just kind of going around, and they're not. I mean, some scientists call an ant colony a single organism, and they are the neurons, but they're planting instead of having physical connectivity to the queen, they have chemical connectivity on the ground and through each other and become one thing, but none of them are a real entity then if it's only one social organism. And you can see that kind of in the big city. Not everything in the big, and we got to be real careful with this because there's a lot of people in the big cities that are amazing. I like to go to the big city and hang out every once in a while, even though I can only do about, a couple of days of it or something.
Well, you know how you made the rural urban divide.
The only thing.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, it's like intelligence. You get close to that thing where it's like, well, I know Bob that, and I know this person. It's like, hey, we're not talking about everybody. This is 0.7, at the 70 percentile, we can, there's still anomalies out there, but this is better than any other metric that we have. And I'm just trying to find something else that we can do in that metric. And I got another one on IQ that's pretty cool, talking about all this military stuff and going back to Heraclitus had a quote. So out of every 100 men, 10 shouldn't even be there. 80 are just targets. 9 are the real fighters, and we are lucky to have them, for they make the battle. Ah, but the one. One is a warrior, and he will bring the others back. So I decided trying with the wave properties and looking at all these different things, intelligence. It's like, well, okay, let's look at the IQ bell curve and let's kind of put this into there. And you might be trouble to see this one, but the 10% shouldn't even be there. The U.S. Army had figured out that anything under low 80s IQ, ends up being 10% of the population. Boom. Heraclitus is right on that. 80 are just targets. And they were kind of in the average IQ, a little above average when you take the whole aggregate. But in these 9 warfighters that make the battle, those are your, when I looked at IQ studies to be a sniper, and when I went into being a sniper, you'd have a GT score of 110, and that's argumentative of what that means to IQ. But you had to have higher IQ to be in snipers, and same thing goes for special forces and all of that. And that kind of got them into a higher bracket on the IQ. And that one that's going to bring them home, this is the important part. Your commander and your officer cannot be more than 30 IQ above his lowest denominator soldier, as there's a complete communication breakdown. And this goes back to what Dr. The Canadian guy that just blew up in the college scene.
Peterson.
Peterson was talking about this. It's IQ, because it's only 70 percentile or whatever, a metric for seeing success. That means that there's a plateau of you only need a certain amount of IQ. So your guy with 200 IQ is going to be a horrible leader because he's going to overthink and he can't communicate to his actual warfighters who are around the 105 mark of IQ. So you're looking for leaders that are above the plateau of 110, not above the plateau of 140, for your captains and below, like that are working with your grunts, and that goes up the scale, but smaller exponentially, I would assume. And
this makes perfect sense. So that you can, by having more chains in the link, more links in the chain of command, you can capture more IQ.
Yep.
And then by
communicate more.
Right, and then segment that down into smaller units, then you can capture more higher performers. Mm-hmm. And what was my other thought on that? And then so you were saying like the 80% that are targets, we get into this sort of short, low investment, the high frequency.
Yeah, as you go down that IQ or warrior bell curve, having its plateaus of nothing below this and nothing above this. Mm-hmm. Once you get in between those two plateaus and on that curve, you're seeing the gradually less and less investment as you get lower and lower or further and further away from the battlefield on, what they're going to invest in that. Take Delta Force, for example. It is nobody knows how much they spend a year on a Delta Force operator.
Mm.
I mean, I've heard they shoot 5,000 bullets a week if
Wow.
they can.
So, and that ends up being the long low, which then that gets the investment, and that's you're preserving that long life history strategy. And then with your average grunt, or we call them ground pounders here, it's the short time frame. They might be in, they might be out, so they get a lower investment. And then from there, all you really need is just self-sorting. You just need a system of self-sorting within it.
Yeah. And the with the I guess with the grunts, well, I guess with all of this is a lot of warfare is people think that, that we're going to stay with these brigade elements and this brigade combat team thing. And the future is going to be, I see this progression as it's going to be completely opposite. We're going to have way less soldiers with way more capabilities until the point of technological no return. And now technology becomes the target or enemy if it's with the singularity and AI era. But with just combat alone, there's going to get a point where you carrying a cell phone, you carrying a radio, you having a laser and using that laser, which is already here on all of this, but getting to the point where it will be deadly as hell just to even have that on the battlefield, because they're going to detect you because of technology being so nuts, or just take it out electromagnetic or warfare style. Air is going to start to become, once they control all of the electromagnetic weaponry, air power is going to start to crumble down. And then, boy, the infantry grunt is really going to come back to be a major focus. And then it's going to decentralize, and hey, we need a lot of wolf packs now and a lot less support, and you guys need to be able to support yourself more.
So less reliance on infrastructure. So that ties back into what, because I sent the link about Tainter, and he's talking about complex societies where, yeah, go ahead.
I said I didn't get all the way through his stuff, but I've been working on. I've been trying to keep up with your guys' big brains. And
he's talking about complex societies, that as societies encounter problems, things like division of labor or adding in organization and adding in, which then gets institutionalized, and then you have policies. This is all adding complexity, and that it has initially exponential benefits, and then it reaches a point where there's diminishing returns, and then it collapses quickly. And he's saying that it collapses quickly because they reach problems of complexity that they're trying to solve by adding more complexity, so it accelerates the problem. And one of the examples that he gave of avoiding that was the Western Rome and Eastern Roman empires, where Western Rome collapsed rapidly. Eastern Rome, what they did is they decentralized. They started scaling back from centralization, putting more power into regional hands, and then bringing back a local militia. And it wasn't one big megalithic army anymore. And they did that across the scale. So it was, he called it systemic simplification, which ties right back into everything you're talking about.
Decentralization and simplification, same thing. It's all, and then goes into the power laws and prices law, performance laws, but when you get to this, like what it's really just talking about, hey, we're talking high short versus low long on a strategy spectrum of everything. They're like, we knew that. That's been we know the electromagnet, but when you take that and you really apply it to everything, that's where you can be like, hey boss, you might want to rethink our human resources and our organization, the way we select and who we're, you know what I mean? And things like this it's also evidence on some of these things with the RK and the two-parent system, the investment and all that, where in football, the best football quarterbacks of all time, they usually come from high middle class or upper middle class, two-parent families, and usually 3 kids in the home, all usually somewhere close together. I looked at a lot of the guys in the military, and like I say, there's anomalies for everything. We know this, but the general pattern, when I saw the higher and higher up the scale of the guys I got to witness in the military, which is just fucking humbling as shit. And, you know, getting to work with 3rd Special Forces Group and go out and do isolation of their operations, their objectives, and seeing how these guys and get to know their backgrounds a little bit. And it was just kind of just this divergent pattern towards the K-selective masculine side. And it was just too much to not recognize, you know what I mean?
Is it like almost all the astronauts come from Ohio, I think, rural areas in Ohio? So I'm assuming that a lot of these guys are coming from small towns or rural centers. I mean, if we took that high low and applied it in an economic sense, your fast and high would be economic velocity, which is going to happen in the city. So it's just a matter of turning over transactions. It's not about actually being productive or accumulating. It's just turnover. Just keep the currency moving. Then you move out into the long low, which is the rural areas. Well, what is that? That's production. So it's about growing, and there's less infrastructure to rely on, less commons to rely on. So it demands that you be more self-reliant. Whole different temperament comes out of it, right? And then we self-sort that way. Those that can't stay in the rural areas end up gravitating towards the cities, right? And not having kids. And, you know, the whole thing.
Well, so another thing I before I forget about it, I wanted to talk about was, if you looked at a city structure from the side, and it would look like the bell curve, a wave or whatever. Bigger city you get, the bigger these buildings get with skyscrapers and become a bigger physical wave. But then you see with that can come a reason for legal restrictions and stuff like that. Hey, no more metropolises allowed. We're not allowing anything built over 5 stories. No
Too
more.
big to be allowed, right? You
Now
get to a certain side, then it has to go through a mitosis, split off, and become separate entities, right?
So that all your cities get more of a low, long topography, even as far as man-made structures in what we see. And then the urban heat island is that same thing. As you go from the rural, it's lower temperatures, higher temperature at the base of it, and lower as you get back out in the rural. Same, it follows that same wave property. And
and it makes sense, because where you're starting to get into the skyscrapers, or you're getting into 10 or 20-story buildings, you're getting it more human concentration. And then what happens with that? Well, you've got more traffic, you've got more people on the LRT, so you have more disease spreading, you have more frustration.
They have a word for it. It's called man-made climate change. And that's where they're propagating that word out of, is right in those centers. You know, I mean, look at Greta Thunberg, where she come from, the biggest city of her country. You know, it's overwhelming when you really just pick this apart. And the cool thing is, I really, you know, I don't know how he's going to take it or what, but I'm excited. I'm interested to see how you and guys like Kurt can maybe, is this applicable in a lot of, you know, in the legal realm and the language that he's trying to, you know, that he's doing. And hopefully it can be a tool to simplify for all of their works. But I don't know. Like I say, I come from a really weird background. I've never had one of these discussions. Most of my friends, and when I post about this stuff, are kind of like, yeah, dude, go Chiefs, you know, or and God bless them. I you know, but I don't know, you know, I don't have a college degree. I don't have any academic connections, physics connections, or anything. So what I'm going on is just a multidisciplinary, looking at everything, trying to mathematically, in a way, simplify it into one spectrum or one thing. And that's the only thing I could come up with. And so far, there's not a whole lot out there that has much credence against it besides what is those anomalies, kind of like what is it, the old tortoise or something that kind of is anomaly in RK, where it's like outlives everything but is not, you
Yeah,
know, like I don't know, they have those things.
yeah, there's always going to be outliers, right? So
Outliers, yeah.
yeah, and then what it is that you can find insights across the aggregate, across the population. Those insights are not going to be applicable on the individual level. Well, the inverse is the same. Your insights about an individual are not going to be applied to the population. It's just because you're crossing domains of scale that they're not measured, they're not comparable. Yeah, that's. I think that it sounds to me like what you've done so far is you found a heuristic, a quick way of honing in on a measurement. And I think there's obviously something to it, because it does come up. It comes up in the biology. It's coming up in populations, coming up in performance, it's coming up in organizational structure. And I think that that eventually what it comes down to is that we're always combating entropy. And oddly enough, any stable system is really just a really good entropy generator. So I think that's why we see these patterns where it connects back into energy, or it connects into animal populations and so on, is because the fundamental dynamic at the end of it is that we're operating off of entropy.
Yeah.
Entropy is driving the whole thing. And then maybe that's what's happening, is if we get to that shorter wavelengths, we're getting to a point where we're compromising that entropy generator. We're no longer a stable entropy generator, and it's starting to collapse or demanding a change, right? A lot of the times when we're complaining about like historically complaining about, like, for instance, we can say that the Enlightenment is failing us now, and it may not necessarily be that it's a failed system as much as that we've reached a new domain of complexity and we need a bifurcation. It needs to split off into two systems now, and then a whole new.
And that goes right back. That goes right back to the very, very beginning when I was talking about with Isaac Newton, and my favorite quote of his is that kind of runs all of this, is him saying that truth is always in the simplicity and not in the duplicity and multiplicity of things. And that is exactly what the scientific field has done, is it exploded so fucking in the humanities and language, linguistics, fucking everything. And now definitions of those. And that's why I see where, Kurt Dulo's had to go and fight all of these different things to try and define it, and come together. But the shit, forgot what I was talking about there.
Simplicity and
but
even with complex systems, like emergent complex systems, they're built off of simplicity. They're not complicated. They're complex, which just means that they're multifaceted. But the underlying principles that they're following, the operations, are always very simple. It's just that they're simple. They're simple relations that are iterative and recursive.
Yeah,
they're always going in tandem with each other. So it's not like you can just take a linear approach to it. So.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to. I just kind of was hoping to come on and be able to have this hopefully start a little bit of a fire that might lead to others saying, how does this apply to my world, my perspective, what I'm working on, and give that feedback like, yes, it does, no, it doesn't, you got to fix this, that's wrong, or whatever. And as we go through it, but one other thing on that urban heat island, before I forget, I had a little note of it. It was about one of the last things I've got is on the cancer. If you look at cancer and you see that it's the cells dividing rapidly at a rapid place, which is just like high frequency of great reproduction. And then it becomes a mass and it has density, and the temperature goes up, and you can even see cellular growth and the temperature of the vascular needing to fight this and deal with it, of the cancer growing. and to the tumor. And so if you look at America and you look at NASA's not just temperature of air temperature maps, where they do the satellite imagery from thermal, but actual ground temperature, and you just see the cities pop out, right? Where the same thing if you look at the 2016 election, same thing if you look at population density map, it's all the same. And
You know, there's a great young guy out of Australia called Coltane, who did an analysis on the 2016 election. I think he did something else in an election in the UK. And he had made that same connection, that is rural and urban. But then he looked at urban centers and then got really granular around who's voting left, who's voting right. And he had mentioned something that stuck out in my head, that you could look at a downtown core, and the people that were voting right were in neighborhoods that had, I think it was less than 8-story buildings.
Yep.
And then right across the street would be a 20-story building, and that would be all progressive. So it crosses those scales from, you know, a 5-block radius to the entire country. It's the same pattern all the way down.
But if you took those people in those 8-block buildings compared to a town in Mississippi with 50 people and put them into one entity, pretty soon the Mississippi people would be going more right and the 8-block story people would end up diverging left. And that's what you see in the cities. There's still going to be a competition, and we need this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to form as, you know what, fuck them. And they're, in that side of town, and well, what's a big F you to them? Just, all right, we're not going to be liberal like that. I don't know. You know what I mean? It kind of.
Well, and I think it oscillates. So the idea with chaos math is that chaos isn't actually really random. So like you can have I always use elk population. I don't know why. Yeah, the elk population year to year will appear random on a scale, but then it'll reach a point where it'll always be at 35 or always around 15, and then always around 35. And what it is, it's a bifurcation. And I think that we need each other, left and right need each other. But then we get to a point of sort of mitosis where it needs to split off, bifurcation, and then start the whole thing all over again, which goes back to right back to what you're saying about that lower power distance, smaller units, you capture more performance, and, you know, it just seems fundamental to life, right? So how do we capture it and rebuild norms around it, right?
Yeah. Well, on that, it kind of look at Israel and how they've kind of, in America, it's gotten to the point where very few need to serve to fight very few war, to lose very few compared to what we did 2,000 years ago. And if you look at the scale of deaths per year, we're way at the bottom of the slide. You look at the information per year, we're way at the top of the slide. And that's causing this, oh my God, World War III or whatever. And it's like, no, we just blew up some jackass, and they're not going to do shit because we'll stomp them. But we need that fight that comes socially from it, because our society is not fighting wars anymore and not getting slaughtered and not defending their literal base here. So they need an internal competition. We need the NFL. We need, even though, hey, get off your fucking knees and all that shit. But, and talking about that even goes in towards that mimicry that I was talking about. You'll find higher mimicry in the urban areas where you find these gangs that are like, now they're popping up. There's no wars, but we're going to pop up like we're the gangsters, and they got a platoon of 30 dudes, all with guns and camouflage and dog tags hanging out. And, they end up being the cuttlefish, the weakling that's using mimicry, not like manly men who are just emulating what a man is, whether it's a soldier, whether it's a fucking lumberjack, or just a good fucking father or good leader and good husband,
I was thinking about that when you made that distinction, mimicry versus emulation, that because there's a number of different, we always talk about virtue signals, but there's a whole stack of different signals, from sanity signals to quality signals, and it's almost like emulation is picking up on quality signals and then following it, where mimicry is just picking up on social signals. It's just it's not emulating. It's mimicking the social signal to get the status, as opposed to identifying a quality signal and then following it. Right? It's interesting.
Yeah, and when you go down that mimicry emulation duality, we can call it a divide and divide one side against the other. And that's what, one thing I was talking about, I sent you a message about Tupac Shakur, right? You can't say anything about him. Hell, Mike Tyson will try and beat you up if you do. Those types of, you know, it's so central core to to a lot of people. And he's this icon, and all I see is a fucking an absolute cuttlefish of society, a weak male who cannot sexually compete. So 50% of his body is camouflaged as male to or female, to bypass the males to get down below where the females are. When they turn the other side and they show a male side on the other side. And if you look at Tupac Shakur and throughout his rap videos and pictures, he's got camouflage head to toe, yet he's got more jewelry than any woman I've ever known. He dances more than any woman I've ever known. Likes to sing. He shows his butt off, the sagging thing, like girls love to show their butt off. Has more shoes than any girl I know. And hell, he even kind of talks up an all-male initiation prison life, like of being around men. Well, you know what the initiation ends up being for those guys. And it's just like, this is the most feminine shit. That's what women do. And it's always coming from this, you know, there's social aspects to this as well, but mainly geographic, demographic.
It seems to be that coupled with, because I had a long conversation till 3 o'clock in the morning with some local guys about this last night. The cultural side of it is that they're valuing distrust signals. So they glorify the gangster. They glorify the guy that is profiting off of betraying social trust, right? And then you throw on top of that, well, then that's manly. So then they appropriate these signals that come out of the very opposite, right? Dutton, the Jolly Heretic, just did a video on social signals, and he gets into that about how cheaters cheat and how you have legitimate signals and then you have cheaters and what they do. And that was one of the things that he brought up. I'll link it when we put this up.
I want to see that. Yeah, that took me on a loop for a while once I got into mimicry and looking at mimicry in nature, and then seeing the social camouflage in the hipsters and Antifa, and the hipsters grew like, you remember like 2005 in Boston, I think it was where they came from, or maybe Brooklyn, not Boston. Sorry, Boston, it was Brooklyn. The hipster kind of movement came out after everyone had seen the special forces in Afghanistan with these grizzly beards and just awesome guns and everything and doing cool shit. And it's just like, any time that the true warrior makes a statement to the fucking world, someone has to, on the weak side, compete back of like, no, I'm the gangster. Like, they didn't take the soldier mimicry in gangster rap until after the Gulf War, when it was shown to the fucking world on national television, and they had to compete with this in their circles of who's the fucking, now I'm a warrior, you know. And then they started socially camouflaging, stealing from the soldier to do that. Now, this is a tricky slope. There's so much emulation. There's kids out there playing war. I love that. That is not mimicry, and I'm not talking down to those people. Or someone who goes out in the woods and cuts down trees in their fucking camouflage pants and has some military boots. No, that's emulation. I mean, you can have those emulation markers as long as you live the emulation. And the thing is that we need to do is take emulators and wake them up that you are an emulator. And these fucking mimicry faggots out here, pussies, excuse me, to the LGBT and all that. I didn't mean it it's a derogatory, yeah. Don't burn my house down. So it's one of those, we gotta wake the social conscious up to this subconscious mimicry weakness that's plaguing the NFL. It's plaguing music. It's plaguing entertainment. It's doing such a disservice. They end up stealing from the warrior and then ostracizing them at the same time of saying they're too dumb for college. You know, they're baby killers. They're, you know, oh, it was all a conspiracy theory, so you're dumb and you're stupid for going over there and falling for that trap. And then they try and act like that. and they're stealing from it. And what they're doing is they're winning with this on the media side and the entertainment and the rap and all of that. It's been just coming and coming with the feminism movement into masculinity for two men. And it's really done a number on the veterans coming home that love this country and don't understand why these people are doing this to them. And they don't live, you know, and that's what I was trying to get to is on the, some of the Hemingway 100 years ago, this March 13th came out an article called Slackers in War, Popular in Peace, or Popular in Peace, Slacker in War, before he wrote all his book in 1920. So 100 years, this March 13th is going to be on it. And I'd highly suggest people to read that and then look at the evolution that we've come through from them. After World War I and World War II with bicycle gang douchebags coming up, some of them were the failed military guys. Some guys weren't at all, but they took like the bomber names and all this stuff. And,
well, yeah, that's interesting because
this flare, like it's combat patches. And it's like, dude, you don't have enough flair. Put more flair on. Like, you're not
yeah.
And then they kiss each other like the Hells Angels douchebag, you know?
Because the history of bikers began with ex-Air Force that when they came back, not being able to afford a car, so they buy these motorcycles with sidecars,
and then others mimic that.
Yeah, then the others mimicked it, but they mimicked it in an antisocial way, and then it became about crime, and it became about, you know, the one percenters and living outside society and everything. So I think the distinction with emulation and mimicry is that with emulation, you're signaling that you're willing to bear a cost. Like if you have a young kid that's running around the bush in camo pants, he's saying, this is who I want to be. I'm willing to bear that cost. I'm going to go run out there and I'm going to try to get that experience. And I just can't wait till I get old enough, as opposed to signaling for a theft, where you're trying to show that you've made this investment where you haven't, so that you can get the social kudos from it, right? The respect.
They always talk about the wolf and lamb skin. No, it's the lamb and the wolf skin that you got to watch out for. And they're always going to be you know, I see it in the veteran community too. It's plaguing them, where some of the weaker ones, because it has its own dichotomy or its own scale of this as well. It's subset, like as though it's an own different organism. And inside of that, you'll have this weaker scale that get out and want to be gangster, like, and they go into the VA and like, what can I get? I need PTSD. I've got PTSD. Were you in combat? No, but you know, and God bless to the one, I'm so sorry to the ones that have PTSD from being raped in the military or something else like that. I'm not saying you can't get PTSD from anything but combat, but there is a large chunk, that being aside, that go in and say, I'm going to get PTSD because I'm going to get money now, and I'm going to be able to wear that on my shoulder as a combat patch. And people say, oh, you were in the military and you got PTSD. You must have seen some shit. And when you read the article about that Ernest Hemingway wrote, it's the same thing.
Well, and I found that interesting because when we were talking about that, I was trying to remember when that shift was with returning vets. And I think it was after the First World War was the first time, at least in Western European societies, where vets were not respected when they came back. And I don't know if it was necessarily not respected, it's that there was no place for them. Like
they were mimicked, so they were stolen from, and that's where that social subconscious disregard for is, I want to be, no, look at me. Fuck those guys. No. Hey, ladies, look at me. Those guys, they're dumb. They're, you know, no. Or, hey, I'm going to steal something, you know. And that started in World War I, what he's talking about coming home from. And you can see the history from then till now. Look at in Vietnam War. Well, the U.S. military is over there fucking these boys up. And, I mean, they did awesome in Vietnam War. Australians as well. It was an awesome thing. We were held back by our own politicians. Hell, we had the war sign almost done. And yet people have to degrade that. And after they made that statement and through it, you started to see these civil rights groups, movements, or whatever that came after the civil rights already, oh, you got all your shit, and now you're going to come up with the Black Panthers and be all military and all this, and like, no, we're tough. And I see this, there's some social frictions that creates this as well, but you can't deny that since World War One, that when the militaries of the Western areas make a statement on the world, weak people have to kind of almost make up for it or lash out and attack. Their ego is just hurt or something and felt attacked. Prime example is Colin Kaepernick. I'm a football warrior. No, nobody's shooting you. All right, you can call a timeout. Shut the fuck up. You're not a warrior. Okay, you can emulate a warrior, and that's what all I tried to do. I'm a lot of guys up here. I'm down below, and I got to emulate and be around some amazing dudes, and I'm just trying to emulate them the rest of my life. Especially some of them that lost, but you got guys like Colin Kaepernick that are trying to mimic the war, and he'll wear a bunch of bullshit and act like a social justice warrior, like he's fighting some real enemy and killing them and shooting them in their fucking face, and he's not. And then he goes vegan, loses his career, blames it on the white man. He's grown up in a white household, rich, and it's just, he has to lash out. When we took out Soleimani, the Iranian terrorist in Baghdad, thank God he's laying right there where his casualties, his terrorist acts were laying before. Beautiful. That's just beautiful. He has to come out and say, attacks by the white man or Western or America on the brown and black man is just nothing new here. And it's like, okay, I see you lashing out because of your ego and because of your mimicry, and it's being unveiled by the military. Those, yeah. But it's such a touchy subject because it kind of hits all of us. Even hits me on like, hey, sometimes I might wear a military hat or something. It's like, man, am I being too much of a mimicry here, or
Well, I told you the same thing just about the pants I wear at work, and then when I found out about that tactical, and then I was like, oh shit, that's like not at all why I'm wearing it. It just fits the bill for what I'm doing. And then that whole thing runs through your eye. Am I giving false signals and everything else? But
you're holding on to true signals of emulation, like the wolf, the sheepdog, the warrior camouflage, but not going out and wearing it on your sleeve and using it for social camouflage.
Yeah.
Get a job. You're not doing that. That's not what it is. And that's why I'm saying it's such a touchy subject, because people can be just like, I wasn't in the military. It's like, well, that's not what I'm talking about here. It's like, we're going back to the whole respect of what even creates a damn warrior is having a citizenry even worth fighting for. If we didn't have a good citizenry, we'd be like the Iraqis, where they're just like, they don't really give a shit. It's like,
Well, and this is one of the things, when I got back into construction, I was sort of romanticizing the working man.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a buddy of mine who's also in construction that was online a lot. So this is nonsense. Half the guys at work are still crap. They're not, behaving the way that you're saying. I'm saying that's not the point. The point is if we have this sort of romantic notion about what we do and what our role in society is, there's guys in the middle around the fence that will take it to heart and then will try to live up to it. And then this becomes sort of the archetype that they're striving for, and go, that day that, that you've worked 18 hours for 3 days straight, you don't go home and say my life sucks. You go home and say, that house isn't going to fall down on that family now. We had to do that. We couldn't leave it. So it calls us forward to being better than what we are. And that's what emulation is it's pulling you forward to be better. And it sounds like the transition is difficult for a lot of guys coming back, because we don't have those archetypes in our society anymore, and nobody values them anymore. I think that emulators actually end up signaling that there's value to this archetype, where mimickers are just trying to steal from it.
They destroy it so that the emulators end up saying, well, I guess that's gay now to wear that because they destroyed it, And I even get in that boat. It's like, well, I'm not gonna. I feel weird like wearing a hat with a patches on it anymore, American flag on it, because like so many guys out there, Antifa wearing, you know, whatever. And I get this thing where it's you're talking about how being hard to come back into society, and that's why I think it's so important for the emulators to realize that they are an emulator and how dangerous the mimicry is out there and what they are doing by destroying the American flag now. I mean, they're the warrior with the camouflage, but none of them have an American flag patch on those fake ass camis that they wear on their rap videos. They're putting that shit between their ass, stomping it and burning it. Whenever we went to war after, you know, 9/11 and the Iraq war hit, and we go to war, and there's American flag on every single street, almost every house. We were one. We were so proud that, boom, that's where you get your volunteers to say, hey, this is worth fighting for. We are at our max right now. We are at our peak performance. Boom, we're together. And they go and do that. And they go to 10 years. They do it for 8 years, 12 years, 20 years. Guys are getting out right now, and they're seeing the flags had been, you know, especially 2014, 16 in that region, all the flags getting burned. And it was devastating to me. And that's why it fueled me to get to what is the cause of all of this? I don't understand why I left and what I came home. And the Vietnam guys went through the same thing. And Hemingway went through the same damn thing. But he was the first person I can find in history to really, really highlight this. And he did it while he was still at the newspaper, you know, fresh back.
Yeah, I remember my father served, and I didn't. But I remember talking to him once, because he never talks about the military once. And the culture is different in Canada. So if you're a gun owner, you don't tell anybody. Like it's really hard to, you know, I think maybe only 3 or 4 times I've discovered somebody was a gun owner that just happened to come up in conversation. Like you hide it. But I find the military personnel do the same thing. They're not going and leaving in their uniforms. I've got 2 or 3 guys that are in the reserve in this building here. And the only reason why I know it is because I happened to get on an elevator really, really early in the morning when they were taking off. But they hide it. They don't tell anybody they're in the military because it's a source of shame, right? So I talked to my old man about it a little while ago, and he's like, you know, like don't paint me as some, you know, vet or hero. I only signed up in the military just to get out of the shithole I grew up in. Yeah. And my point was that doesn't matter. You still did it, and you bear the cost. But even 10, 15 years ago, I remember him talking about it and saying that he enjoyed the military life. And he was talking about, what about guys like that are apprehensive about shooting or that sort of thing. And he just shakes his head and says, you damn well do it. Like he was a military guy. But now now he's ashamed of it. It seems like he doesn't want to be associated to it.
Now let's flip that. Let's talk about like the emulators, which the number one emulators are going to be out there are going to be the ancestors of veterans. They are just like yourself. And I talk to all the time, the most people who have a real actual, like not just, hey, thank you, but want to, you know, really understand or try and talk to it. They all had a grandfather or father who served that never talked about it. And then they're letting, and we're finally getting to the point where we don't really give a shit anymore. We're just going to talk about it because it's all on the TV and you know what I mean? Like everyone's talking about it. You all think I'm either homeless, on drugs, or suicidal. The whole society does. That's the only news you ever hear about is homeless veterans, suicide, and it's just this constant pressure on the wolf to make the wolf, which goes back all the way to
way past prehistory.
Just that iconic trophic cascade, and this goes to that what I was showing you with that talking about that about the how what was it? How what did I say? How wolves changed Afghanistan, that video I made. And it kind of goes into that with the wolf and
that was brilliant. It was the narration about wolves in Yellowstone laid over top of images in Afghanistan. Yeah.
And how we just released the wolves back into there because the wolf had been ran out for so long. And it was so you going back to what we were talking about with the World War II and all that stuff, I would say this is a huge investment for Western culture, because if the emulators came out and just started stomping emulators, like the gangbangers wearing all that shit, and just what are you, and everyone, even girls were like, that's gay, like, stop it, grow up, that type of thing, of the true mimicry types out there. And that was shunned societally. You would see a huge increase in investment of those veterans back into the community, because they will be brought back into the system again and feel great about their, you know what I mean?
To have the rightful place. I mean, I've been noticing this across a bunch of other things. We had a plumber on the job site the other day. He's a young guy too. I think he's in his early 30s. He's got 3 kids, and he's the sole breadwinner. They made a decision his wife wasn't going to work. That's pretty rare. And he's maintaining it. He's maintaining a mortgage, maintaining his work truck, everything else. So when he brought this up on the job site, yeah, my wife doesn't work and I got 3 kids. I was like, fucking good on you, man. Like, that's awesome. And the other guys are all kind of looking at me like, what the hell are you talking about? So later they brought it up, and I said, think about it. This is a world where you need 2 incomes to get by. He's living in one of the most expensive cities in Canada. He's raising 3 kids, a wife, paying a mortgage by himself. Like, who the fuck are you to give him a hard time?
See, and that's the warrior wolf of society that grows guys that say, hey, I remember, a lot of people like this and my culture, and I'm going to go fight for those types. Like, that's, even anyone who does that is automatically in that, like, damn.
Well, and that's what I think that we need to do, is that we need to start romanticizing it again so that we start living up to it.
And it's coming back. I think it's coming back. But it needs, I mean, gosh, we almost need something that's just irrefutable to crush them with, and really kind of, you got a lot of high IQ liberals that don't have the smarts to understand what some of the conservatives are talking about, and conservatives have a lot of the smarts and experience and know how to do things, but not as much IQ sometimes. And then you get where that plateaus, like they're whenever you reach 2 of them above the plateau, but they still can't communicate, and we almost need something that's so simple that they can say, oh, that's what you guys have been saying this whole time, and show them.
Yeah, like that's that term I came across last week or earlier this week about vehicular viability, that the libertarian fallacy is essentially you're destroying the very thing that makes you possible. I think there's something in that. If you're trashing on your vets, you can criticize your government, but if you're undermining the trust in the institutions that keep you alive, that's vehicular non-viability. Yeah. You're not only killing yourself, you're killing everybody else.
Yep. Yeah. It's kind of the pigeon on the, there's 2 people playing chess, and the pigeon comes on and kicks all the chess pieces, shits all of the board, and squawks saying, I won, I won, I won. And it's like, gosh, no, I'm not going to go down the libertarian route. I don't think there's a lot of libertarians out there. But God bless them, though. They're like hippies with guns. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we'd have that conversation too. I think maybe next time. I don't know what your Sundays are like. If you can participate in Howls, I think that
I'll try to this one.
Yeah, if you can, because the conversations, a lot comes out of them, and then you get 3 or 4 brains working on it. Because I think maybe at some point we should talk about that difference between distribution and decentralization. Because I was coming at it differently, saying that, like, with a chain of command where you have authority and a power at the top, it's distributing power with accountability down the chain. So,
and I thought about that too, and that's the thing, is that decentralization is still a form of centralization, because it still comes from a center point. It is just the distributed way of decentralizing that central authority and the power down.
But I was thinking that maybe a better term is a delegation. that it's delegating it down down the road. Because really what happens is the higher ups maintain accountability and then hand the power to act down the chain.
Yep.
So it's that accountability, that responsibility that keeps the whole chain involved. And the reason why that person has authority over you is because their ass is on the line more than yours is, even though you're the one that has the power to act.
Yep.
Because I was thinking in terms of load balancing and electronics and that in terms of distributed systems. And the problem is that there isn't that continuity through the whole system. There's replication of the processors that decide where the load balance goes and so on. So there isn't literally there is no centralized executive function. So then I was like, okay, Evans is right. Like he's right. It's not distributed. It is decentralized. Yeah. So we could explore that someday too. I need to go get some stuff done. I got a massive headache from staring at this computer. So like, thank you so much. I'm going to.
No, thank you so much for bringing me.
Yeah. Like this is what the whole group's about. People participating, forming community. And that can only happen when more of us participate. And it looks like you've been doing a lot of stuff in isolation on your own, which fits perfectly with what we're doing. So let's work together.
Yes, that's exactly. And I'm just I'm excited to learn from your group. Keep learning big words from you guys.
The thing is, all of us big word guys, we're no different than where you are right now, like a year or 2 years ago.
Yeah, and well, the thing that's amazing about it is just, over time in the histories, there's been so much piled up in science and thought and everything else and philosophies that they created all these need for a dictionary so big that you have to learn it all. And that's what confused me because I'm such a, what's the, what's the core? What's the,
yeah.
I don't know. But that's what I love learning from you guys because I don't get this in a lot of other places, and I just I can't wait to see where the feedback comes from, where people look at it from their perspectives of the cup and let's see what's in it,
Right, because I think that the two big highlights for me was that relationship of power distribution or power distance with your high performers, your square root high performers. Like there's a whole ton of shit we could do around that alone in terms of political organization, any type of organization.
Yeah. And then, we'll have to, almost have to need to link matrix this out, like as though it's cellular, and start to link it out, do the chalkboard or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man, I'm going to let you go. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for having me on.
No problem. Thank you for taking the time. All right. I'm going to hit end recording.